Hi,
Hey, long time no see.
long time no see. How are you?
I'm not bad. I'm hanging in there. How are you?
Everything's good. What's
Yeah,
new?
uh
Busy.
yeah, very busy. Probably as busy, well, not as busy as you guys, but busy.
Well, it's probably as busy as us.
It's keeping up with everything that's going on in the brain cancer world is definitely there's a lot going on, and I think that's great.
Yeah,
I would rather be busy because there are so many new things coming out than
right.
be waiting and not having a lot going on. So yeah, I guess from that perspective, I'm very excited that I'm busy.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, we can go ahead and get started. Tell me just a little bit about what we're doing.
So, what I'd like to know, you guys recently posted that you guys are have open enrollment, and it was for a clinical trial, if I'm not mistaken. So, what I want to do is just kind of give listeners, patients, families. I mean, we have thousands of subscribers to our podcast, and we're
That's
growing social
amazing. That's
media.
so amazing.
It's kind of astounding because when I first started the first season, I really just figured this, I'm just going to do one season, two seasons. It's in memory, Mike, and then I'm going to, I'll figure it out. And it just really started growing and ballooning. And then we started attaching a lot of social media to it. I started doing more public speaking, and I realized that people needed this.
Yeah. No,
I need
we
this. So
yeah,
yeah, it's just been kind of this amazing. And now because of it, I'm doing patient advocacy and I'm
right.
helping build a roadmap for patients and families, just kind of on the side. And so, I try to stay as up to date as possible. And so you guys seem to have a lot going on, and I want patients and families to know what's available to them.
Okay, great. Let's roll.
Let's do it. I'm already recording, so
Um, well, great. Do you want to start? You start.
well, tell me a little bit about, I think it's called Celgene. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay, so explain that to me.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on today. And, it's an amazing time for glioblastoma patients and brain cancer patients in general. I would say it's a confusing time also. So, your podcast, I think, is amazing in it's just one opportunity to vet some
Mhm.
of the stuff that's out there. I'll give you an example. I saw a patient yesterday who had seen three of the top neuro-oncologists in the country with glioblastoma and got three totally different recommendations
Yeah.
and this is a very, very well connected sort of affluent New Yorker that had resources and means
Mhm.
and was left dumbfounded. And I promise you, ask any of my staff who was on the telehealth call, I almost like put my head down in on my desk saying, what's happening? So I think your podcast can act as a medium to allow for clarity
Yeah.
in these things. And when I tell you reputable, you know everybody by their first names. So the Lenox Hill Brain Tumor Center was founded about 9 years ago.
Mhm.
There was no cranial neurosurgery program here at this hospital. This is where, Beyonce and Chelsea Clinton went to deliver babies, or, Nicholas went to get his knee done. But we built this program with the intent to offer patients a different experience, and one that was not only more intimate, but more
Mhm.
scientifically driven, a little bit in a faster way than what I call the stodgy old Ivy Towers, of which I trained at and I love.
Mhm.
But when I left Penn and Cornell, I just felt I needed an avenue where I didn't have as much bureaucratic red tape.
Mhm.
And that's what we have offered to our patients. So we run 30 trials now at Northwell for GBM.
Wow.
Um, it's a big number. And it's a
Yeah.
confusing number. So how do you know which patients go into which trial? Where do you fit them in? How do you, we don't have any financial incentive, by the way, zero.
Okay.
None of us
I think
get
that's
paid.
critical to mention, because I think that that helps patients understand the incentive behind the work that's being done.
And there is a lot of incentive. And no patient should be ashamed to ask, do you have any skin in the game? Do you have
Hmm.
stock? Do you have options? Are you on the board? Is your partner on the board? Did you create the device? Are you getting royalties? Nothing. We want no, people say if there's no conflict, there's no interest. That's crap. We want to have no financial incentive, and none of us do.
Mm-hmm.
We have an academic incentive, meaning that we are interested scientifically to improve the treatment for patients with brain cancer.
Mm-hmm.
We were fortunate enough to be approached by Bristol Myers Squibb, which the local subsidiary is a company called Celgene.
Okay.
And so if you hear our BMS trial or the Celgene trial, they're the same trial.
Okay.
And this is a trial that's actually being run in Europe in 14 sites. And they wanted one US site.
Okay.
And that US site is Lenox Hill Hospital.
Okay.
And what's interesting about the trial is, and let me just make sure I have all my information correct. So for any patient that is looking for information on any trial, the really most trusted source, as you know, Shannon, is clinicaltrials.gov.
Right.
And if the information is not updated on clinicaltrials.gov, a patient should really be suspicious. And that is where all patients and spouses should start. So I'm on clinicaltrials.gov right now, looking at all of our trials, and I just want to get the most recent data because I too get confused with some of the inclusion-exclusion criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And
this trial that is running for Celgene, for Bristol Myers, is it for newly diagnosed? Is it for recurrent?
Great. So your question's a good one. This trial, which is the drug is called DC 910. Okay.
DC 910.
DC,
okay.
C's and Charlie, 900. Yeah. 90010. But again, anybody can go to the clinicaltrials.gov and look up Lenox Hill and cross-reference glioblastoma.
Okay.
So we just posted this on February 8th, and this is a trial for newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients.
Okay.
Newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients. And it is looking to enroll total across all sites, about 200 patients. This is what we call a dose escalation trial. So we're still in the early phases. Everybody gets some dose of the drug. And that is the good part of the trial.
So there's no placebo. Everybody's getting some portion of this drug.
Yes, this is a part A of the trial is everybody gets this dose cohort at a specific dose for a specific amount of time.
Okay.
When combined with radiation therapy. So in summary, this drug is for newly diagnosed patients that will be combined with radiation therapy for newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients. And although patients may say, well, Dr. Boockvar, why would I participate in a trial where we don't know what the maximum tolerated dose is? And that's a very legitimate question, meaning that at some point we're going to have a patient that unfortunately has a toxicity related to a dose, right? So how do you consent to something where we don't know that toxicity level? And it's a legitimate question, and one that we have to say that we know the preclinical data, and that's why, for example, at Northwell, we have preclinical colleagues at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories, which is our basic science arm, home of 8 Nobel laureates, and their job is to inform us of what is the preclinical data in non-humans, and that can inform where we think we're going to get toxicity. So people underestimate how important that relationship is having a basic science lab sort of getting us ready to understand this, because I have to look at a human in the eye and say, you may have toxicity related to this drug.
Right.
And how are we going to, and so we're ready to either what we call dose reduce the drug, which is we go back on the dose, we stop the dose, and stuff like that. So safety is paramount to our patients and to our providers. And
well, that's part of why clinical trials are done to begin with, is to show not only the efficacy, but the safety within a patient that's doing it. But without the clinical trials, we don't move the needle. And when it comes to GBM, we have to move the needle. In order to do that, you need clinical trials. So there is always a little bit of an inherent risk. But honestly, when it comes to GBM, I mean, your life is at risk already. I mean, you're kind of already on that high wire.
Well, I think you're right. And I do counsel our patients we have, what the national average of clinical trial enrollment is for glioblastoma patients?
No.
5%.
That's it?
You know what our rate is at Lenox Hill Hospital, which is probably one of the highest in the country? 66%.
Why is that?
So it's a good question. One is, particularly for clinical trials, it's a very active relationship. So you're going to spend more time engaged with your providers. And so that relationship can be laborious to people. And just getting in and out of whether it's New York City or Raleigh, North Carolina, or wherever you're being treated, is an effort. And some patients, frankly, they get the diagnosis and they're not necessarily. I have a patient who's here in New York City again, who says, I just don't have the strength to do it. And that's okay.
Yeah. And that's hard. It is hard. Okay. But it's hard. That's hard.
Others have, sometimes they are scared of trialing something that's not proven. There are also a host of other reasons, but I want to tell your audience two very important things. One general concept is that patients in clinical trials across all human disease, so not just brain cancer, it could be lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or nephritis or whatever, all human disease, patients who enroll in clinical trials outperform patients that do not, period.
Okay, can we just let that hang for a second? Yeah. So that people let that sink in, there is an upside, a major upside to being in a clinical trial versus.
And do you want to know why? So to reiterate, patients in clinical trials, regardless of the disease you have or your loved one has, do better than patients who are not enrolled in clinical trials. That means they have a longer PFS, progression-free survival, and longer OS, which is overall survival. And there are two reasons for that. One is called the placebo effect, which many of us know. The placebo effect is real. It's a real physiologic effect. Yep. So if you enroll in a clinical trial, and I had this patient who was coming to us for the new Mimivax Survive-XM trial that we have, and we can talk about that. And it's a randomized 2 to 3, 2 to 1 essentially. So 2 people get the drug and 1 person would get a placebo. And they were upset. They didn't want the 33% chance of getting the placebo. At which point I said to them, let me remind you that if you participate in this clinical trial, even if you get a placebo, the chance that you'll outperform the patient who does not enroll in the clinical trial is high because the placebo effect is real.
Yeah.
And there's something called the Hawthorne effect. And the Hawthorne effect is observed patients perform better. And those two effects have helped. Now, in addition, when you participate in a clinical trial, you're going to be interacting with a nurse practitioner or an RN or a clinical trials coordinator or a director of a clinical trials officer or a doctor, surgeon, neuro-oncologist, rehab. There's more touches in that person's life. That's just the way it is. Yep. And so that helps find adverse events. It allows for better navigation. There's a whole host of reasons. So I just want to reiterate that again. Even if you're going to get a placebo and you're upset about it, I get it. Yeah. However, the data strongly suggests you're still going to outperform if you don't participate in a clinical trial. At which point they always say, well, I think I'd rather do a trial where I know I'm going to get the drug.
Right. And that's unless it's in a phase 1 or it's almost near FDA phase, that's very hard to guarantee. And I think that's a big part of why I do these interfaces, is to discuss the clinical trials that are at hand. And these are the obstacles that patients do face. And that's why we have kind of become a hub of information. And I do a ton of, I mean, I literally do a deep dive into a lot of the research, but even the translational research, so that the patients don't have to, so that we can really just kind of zero in and hone in on the most important parts. And I think that's what patients do get. They get so overwhelmed and they just want to guarantee, especially with something that's scary. And unfortunately, even without brain cancer, even if it's a different type of cancer, there is no guarantee on anything, to be quite honest. And it's kind of a sidebar, but I have a dear friend that I just lost, who's only in her 30s, and I have her service this weekend, who had cancer and did a different type of clinical trial, worked for a little while, then it didn't. Not brain cancer related in any way, shape, or form. So these are kind of, but the chances that, I think the hope, like you said, even with the placebo effect, mind over matter is such a powerful, powerful, powerful thing. And when you can embrace that in the midst of the clinical trial, and you can understand what's being done, because in all honesty, without the clinical trials, we don't move the needle forward in finding better treatments and helping patients live longer. And that's the ultimate get. That's what we want for people and for families. So it is vital that they understand this.
If you look at your Tylenol bottle in your cabinet, we got to a dose of 325 milligrams per capsule because we did a dose escalation trial at phase 1 trial. And that above that, you developed liver toxicity. And so we went back down to 325, and then we did a trial to show how it intersects with pain. And so you're right. Everything in medicine has been from a trial.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean every trial is perfect. It doesn't mean every trial truly is going to work. And we've had our fair share of negative trials in glioblastoma for sure. Yeah. But we have to keep plugging away. And what's really interesting is we've made tremendous strides. And this is another whole topic that we can discuss. We've made tremendous strides in other human cancers, whether it's melanoma, lung cancer, in particular, for example. Mm-hmm. But we've done that with combinational therapies. And right. So in order for us, and that's another whole issue, is how do we design trials where we're combining drugs? So if you look at melanoma, the combination of PD-1 and CTLA-4 inhibitors has improved treatment for melanoma. We know that tyrosine kinase inhibitors have really changed the course for certain mutations in lung cancer. And by the way, even if that lung cancer goes to the brain, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. So we have to keep trialing. It's going to take this mix and match philosophy. Okay, that trial failed. Let's combine it with Nivo. Let's do this. Yeah. Let's try it. And I always say we're about a decade behind in GBM. So things that were trialed a decade ago in CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, takes about 8 to 10 years to get to GBM, just as far as numbers. Now, advocates like you are helping us move that more quickly. Mm-hmm. But we that's why we just keep pushing. I never let my staff. We had 2 trials open last week. We're very excited about, which we can talk about. But I'm already thinking, okay, that's 2023. What's 2024 and 25 going to be? Because it takes us 6 months to open a trial.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think patients understand that at times either. So tell me a little bit about the 2 trials that you guys just opened last week so that patients are aware of them.
So one of the trials is called IMVAX, IMVAX. IMVAX is based out of the work done by David Andrews at Thomas Jefferson. He started the company. And the really interesting concept, and it's actually going to blow your mind. So we take out a brain tumor that's newly diagnosed. We get the diagnosis of glioblastoma, which is important right up front. Okay. We actually take out what I call 10 rat bites of tissue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because size matters. I need to have good 10 bites of that tissue. I
Okay.
put it in a specimen cup, and I ship it by courier to Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia.
Okay.
It gets put in a little cassette, much like an earbud case
Okay.
with holes in it. Okay.
All right.
It gets shipped back to us, at which point my radiation doctor radiates that cassette with the patient's tumor in it.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, wait for it. It gets better. I then take that cassette and I implant it in the patient's abdomen under the skin. Okay. And over the next 3 days, that radiated tissue gets released into the patient's environment to stimulate their immune system. And that is called an abscopal effect. The abscopal effect, excuse me, I'm getting so excited. I'm joking. So the cassette gets put into the abdomen under the skin of the patient. Okay.
So you're teaching the patient's body to counteract the cancer cells, to build its own immune system, to basically teach the immune system how to attack those foreign cells.
Correct. And that's called immunomodulation or immunoediting.
Yep.
So every single GBM has what's called tumor-associated antigens, or TAA.
Yep.
And the brain is a privileged place. The brain does not want circulating lymphocytes in it. Never has, never will. Evolutionarily, never wanted a single one of your lymphocytes. Now, your lymphocytes are in your lymph nodes, in your thymus, your spleen. If you got a COVID vaccine, you got it under your skin to basically tell your circulating lymphocytes in your body, hey, there's a spike protein in this virus we call coronavirus. You're going to go out there and prevent it from infecting the lungs. And that's what it did.
Right.
But every brain tumor has a tumor-associated antigen, and we can't get our lymphocytes to recognize that.
It's such a protected piece.
Exactly. Two places that are protected in humans, the brain and the testes. Testes and the brain are completely privileged sites. So this cassette goes under the skin and releases tumor-associated antigens into the body. And
so once that happens,
then the patient goes on and gets the standard of care treatment.
Okay.
Radiation.
So the hope is that doing the standard of care after this is done and implanted actually helps the standard of care perform better, because now you've got these antigens associated with, and so it's basically telling the brain that you're supposed to attack this. And because you're separated, you're in a different house from the rest of the body. The hope
so basically the majority of our immune system is from the shoulders down.
Right. Yep.
And so
which is why
it's like, exactly. So you're basically saying, okay, let's tell the army of lymphocytes with this cassette what our tumor-associated antigens are. So then when the patient's brain tumor gets radiated, which also disrupts the blood-brain barrier, this army comes roaring in from the shoulders down.
Wild. That is wild. So wild. So you guys just opened this. How many
We're open.
patients?
I just screened my first patient yesterday. We just opened.
How many patients are you guys taking?
I don't think there's a limit. We're looking for we're looking for patients. Now the hard part about any newly diagnosed trial, as you know, is, and this I'm going to give you a sort of loaded statement, is glioblastoma patients land in any hospital in America, right?
Right.
So a young man, a 55-year-old minor in West Virginia, is not coming to Lenox Hill Hospital. They're going to go to a rural hospital in West Virginia and be biopsied or operated on.
Right.
That patient no longer is a candidate for that IMVAX trial.
Right.
So instead of saying, and this is the part which is another philosophical, I am not incentivized to operate. There are a lot of doctors that have a pay for service, most doctors, almost 99%. And the problem is there's an incentive for the neurosurgeon in that rural community in West Virginia to operate on that patient.
Right.
And I don't mean to pick any place, and I'm just giving an example.
Right.
But
it's a hypothetical.
it's a hypothetical. Any neurosurgeon, in the majority of neurosurgeons in this country are incentivized to operate, no matter what comes in their emergency room. They get paid to operate. What should happen is that neurosurgeon said, you know what? I'm not a glioblastoma guy or gal. I'm going to send this patient to Dr. Boockvar's IMVAX trial in New York City. It just doesn't happen that way.
But this is why we need to teach patients to advocate for themselves. And this is a big portion of what I do. They need to learn how to advocate.
Yeah. So I can't tell you how many times a week I hear the following statement. We were in that hospital. We were just brought there. My husband had a brain tumor. They told him he was going to die if he didn't have surgery. And so just operated. I hear that multiple times a week.
Yep.
And I'm not judging. It just limits it. You know, it's like if you ever put your house on the market, your first offer is probably your best offer.
Yeah.
In neurosurgery, in glioblastoma surgery, the most important part of your treatment is your first operation.
Yep.
If you can get that message out, if you are in an emergency room and someone tells you you have a brain tumor, stop, think about it, go call Shannon, whatever you're going to do, get a referral to a local regional quaternary center that has 8 or 10 clinical trials, that has surgeons that are really well versed, that are associated with preclinical research laboratories, and help yourself. I can't tell you, and it doesn't need to be me. If you're in Jacksonville, Florida, if you're in wherever.
Yeah, because you guys are out there. I mean, I know, and you know a lot. Dr. Levy and I are very, very close. We're very good friends. He speaks beyond highly of you. And we were actually just talking about you not too long ago. And he did the same thing, actually. When Mike was diagnosed, he was Mike's surgeon, but he didn't operate right away. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot available at the time in 2019, but he wanted some opinions. I wanted some opinions. We talked to John Hopkins. He was extremely open to that. And his motto has always been advocate and navigate. And I told him I was stealing that from him. I said, I'm going to take that from you and I'm going to use it. But it's vital. It's so unbelievably, yes, there might be a short window, but there is a window. And
there is a window.
So before you jump off that platform.
I always say there's a lot of peer pressure in medicine. There's peer pressure put on the patient. There's peer pressure put on the provider. You know, if you have a neurosurgeon that walks up to you and says, I'm it. Sometimes it's hard, and the family's comfortable in their local community hospital, so be it. I'm not here to tell you. But when it comes to these clinical trials, I lose patients because of that. And Hopkins loses patients, and UCSF, we all wish that there was the fee-for-service model that is driving surgeries unnecessarily where their expertise may not be there, prevents us from making meaningful gains in the research arm. That's just the God's honest truth.
Yeah.
But we still push along anyway.
Yeah. And it's important that you just have to keep going. And if patients are learning, if they learn as they go, if they learn to advocate and navigate, it will help change the game as we continue to move the needle forward, as we continue to better fund and highlight these clinical trials that are out there and help them radiate in the community. So, you know, I think it's important that people understand these. So we have a few minutes left. We have that clinical trial that you guys just opened up last week. You have the other one with Celgene that is going on right now that you guys are taking newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients for. So if somebody, a lot of times, a lot of what I hear from patients and caregivers is going to clinicaltrials.gov is crazy overwhelming. Even if they know exactly what to look for, when there's a whole host, if they have one or two in mind, but yet they see 20 or 30 that are listed and they don't know exactly which one they're looking at. So what's the best way for patients to really hone in on or to find what they need when it comes to especially like the clinical trials we're talking about. I know 4 patients right now who just got diagnosed, literally just got diagnosed in the last 24 hours.
Well, cancer care is like government. So you have sort of the local government, and then you have the federal government, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are certain aspects to your care that should stay local. And the traveling for a clinical trial, if you had to fly across the country, is taxing, and that doesn't necessarily have to happen. So to answer your question, if a patient's in, I don't know, Chesapeake, Maryland,
Mm-hmm.
they should limit their search to the local regional area, because that loved one should not necessarily have to travel to Houston or to Boston, in my opinion. There is nothing out there. There's enough in the local regional communities at the meccas where we all have great trials. And so I think that's an important place to start. So a lot of families are always come to me and say, I'm willing to fly. And, I have patients from India, Senegal, wherever. And I say, wait, I don't want you bringing your loved one who's sick and perhaps immunocompromised on steroids. Let's talk this through. And as much as I love our trial, and we just have this new trial with Boston Scientific also, where we're using intraarterial Y90, which is a radiation bead, and us and Northwestern are the only 2 sites open right now.
I saw that.
So now that trial, when you're only 1 or 2 sites, there can be an argument if you meet those criteria, because the treatment would be infrequent, meaning that they may come to New York once every 3 months.
Right.
So it takes a little bit of research. I would start at the regional area, stay within, if you're in Florida, stay within Florida. If you're in California, stay within California, unless you hear of something that is not too taxing to travel infrequently for. But the thing that I would encourage is with telehealth now, just reach out. We see telehealth. I saw 6 new brain tumor patients yesterday on my operative day in the afternoon by telehealth. COVID, the silver lining of COVID is our telehealth platforms exploded. So I can see a patient anywhere. Now, there are some legal forms to sign because we're not licensed across state lines. So my ability to render medical opinions, but I am allowed to educate about clinical trials. And so we call those educational visits.
Right.
As this is legal jargon, but we can opine about our clinical trials. So I would take advantage of that, Jen.
So I think I'm glad that we touched on that, because I do think that people forget that telehealth, virtual visits, they really have exploded. And we do have that capability where we didn't 3-4 years ago, or not quite as accessible. So I think that those are a great piece to the roadmap for patients that are trying to figure out what they need to do. And again, whether you're looking within your regional area or you're doing a telehealth appointment to gain more information, it's all about advocating and building a roadmap, is what I really like to say, because that's what we haven't had for GBM. And so being able to have a roadmap and some alternatives or some options ahead of you is really empowering. So I do think that this information for all of those who watch and listen, I'm really glad that they have this. And what I will try to do, what I continue to try to do, is distill down all of the clinical trial information so that patients don't have to do that legwork. So I will take what you have given me, we will distill that down and put hyperlinks on the website so that patients can know exactly where to go and they don't have to weed through a lot of the scientific jargon. But I think having this information for everybody is just crucial. And because these are just things that have come out in the last week, the last month, again, it's prominent, it's relevant, it's current information. And that's, what we try to do at Game On Glio is stay on top of that as much as possible. So I'm glad that you were able to share this with everybody.
Well, again, thank you for having me. I mean, I can sit here all day and talk with you, and it's an important resource. As you can see, I'm very emotional about it. Our days are very emotional. We go from happiness to sadness to happiness again and again and again. And we don't give up our gains, and that's what I tell our patients. And we're gaining. The gains are happening, and I want people to recognize that. I have 3 trials that opened in March already, and so that's a gain. And so bring in the patients. We are safe, caring, and I talked. This is about all the neurosurgeons in the brain tumor space across the country. They really care, and I know them all personally. And we just want to do better for our patients, like your husband, and we will. But with your help, we're definitely getting closer. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and the dedication in the neuro field when it comes to brain cancer and the work that's being done with all of you guys is tremendous. The amount of fight that you guys have, and I have met a number of you now, and that is the one thread that seems to be common. You guys have this fight and fire underneath of you that you just don't let go of. And that is so needed in this particular rare cancer space. And so if anything, if patients take anything away, they should take that away. That is the hope. And there is this current that seems to be really pushing forward. And we've seen it in the last couple of years. There's a huge surge that we didn't have a few years ago. So there's a lot of hope right now. So I'm very grateful, and I'm excited for what is going on. I'm chomping at the bit, and I'm digging into all of this and super excited about it.
I'll put in one plug in the last minute that we have. We put on something called the Brain Tumor Biotech Summit, which is June 9th at Lenox Hill. It's an interactive day that I started about 10 years ago when I was at Cornell. And one thing I always had trouble with is I would go to these cocktail parties and I would talk to all these New York bankers, and they were investing in all these biotech companies, but there was no academic nurse, researcher in the room to talk about the science. And then I would go to these scientific meetings like at Cold Spring Harbor, and they would have all these great scientific discoveries, but there was no one to actually translate those. And so we wanted to get all those people in the same room with patients who were actually consenting for the trials. And the Brain Tumor Biotech Summit has been our day where all those people in the same room, patients, caregivers, biotech CEOs, small pharma, big pharma, investors, and researchers.
And
so
this
come
is on
join
June
us.
9th?
June 9th, all day, Friday.
And this is at Northwell.
This is at Northwell, Lenox Hill Einhorn Auditorium. So I will have more information to follow, but you can mark that, save the date on your calendar.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the information today, and I look forward to connecting and talking to you again soon.
Ditto. Thank you for having me. Talk to you soon.
All right. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.